Welcome again, everyone, to ChargeUp Europe's webinar on private charging. We are very pleased to have you here, and we have an excellent slate of expert speakers to talk about this. So, as you probably know, as ChargeUp Europe, we issued our 2025 State of the Industry report just a few weeks ago, chock full of really interesting insights and information on public charging, on private charging, and numerous other topics, heavy-duty vehicles, energy management, user experience, and much more. So please check out that report. I imagine it will be put into the chat multiple times during today's webinar. My name is Aaron Fishbone. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Greenway, an integrated CPO MSP in Central and Eastern Europe. I'm also the Vice Chair of Communications for ChargeUp Europe and was very involved in the drafting of the State of Industry report, and I will be hosting the call today. It's a really exciting event. We are going to split it up into effectively two different panels. The first on residential charging, and the second one on fleet depot charging situations. And from each of those phases, you'll hear from companies, really concrete stories and solutions provided from companies that are actually deploying charging solutions in each of these spaces. We'd also love to take your questions, so please feel free to write them in the Q&A or the chat, and we will check them out as they come in and hopefully try to answer them as well. So for the first 30 minutes, we'll spend on the residential charging space, and then we'll pivot over to the commercial and the depot charging space. In order to set the baseline and introduce some of the data points in our report, I want to introduce and welcome Chiara Corradi to the floor. She is the Public Policy Manager for ChargeUp Europe, and will share with us some of the top line data points from the State of Industry report. Take us away.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Happy to give you some insights from the State of the Industry report about private charging. Well, first of all, why are we having this webinar on private charging specifically? Well, because it's the 19% of the charging cases, represent 90% of the charging cases, and we don't talk enough about it. So private charging is convenient, it's flexible. You can have the chargers at your home, for example, but not only. If we can go to the next slide, because private charging is entails all the charging cases that happen at private property, and that is thought for defined group of users. So we're talking about residential charging, so single family homes or multi-unit dwellings, but also corporate charging. And here we must think about chargers that are installed at the workplace, at office premises, and are used by the employees, but not only, also external visitors. And we must also think, more importantly, about the fleets. So we are talking about the chargers that are installed at depots, are the private facilities of the company, and are used by the fleets that are employed for the business of that company. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as I was saying, public charging represent the bulk of the charging experience. We have in 2025, we're seeing that 9 out of 10 chargers are private chargers at residential or corporate locations. And this picture is going to stay the same in the future. In 2035, we're expecting 44 million private charging points. We also going to see a fast increase of the corporate charging, but if we go to the next slides, we can also say that electrification of the corporate fleets is not yet at the level that is still below its potential. So we're going to hear, and without spoiling too much, we're going to hear after the panel from Afri what is this untapped potential of the corporate fleet to electrify road transport and scale up EV sales in the EU. Thank you very much for the attention. And discover more about the report, of course, on our website. You can download it through the QR code. Back to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Chiara. Yes, that was just a little taste of all of the data points that are in the report, so please do check it out. And Lucy has just shared the link in the chat. So, I mean, I think probably many of us are familiar with, on one hand, private charging is a very, represents the largest use case because so many people with standalone homes or with dedicated parking spaces have access to a dedicated parking space and a connected power source. So relatively easy for them to charge their electric vehicle right there. But many people, and increasing numbers of people, as EV mobility enters the mainstream, do not have access to a home parking space or a dedicated parking space for where they live. And so, how do we unlock solutions, and how are these people able, and how is charging provided for these people? And so, with us on our panel today, we have a number of speakers who represent companies that are providing solutions for these users. And so, without further ado, Adouin, I would love to start with you, with Zplug, Chaguru, to hear what you are doing and your company is doing in this space. So please introduce yourself and your company and share with us.
Thanks, Aaron. Yes, so Zplug ChargeGuru is a charge point operator specialized in private charging, and more precisely in residential charging. So, for example, office buildings for companies, and for residential buildings, condominiums, for example, or other type of residential buildings. We are in 8 countries in Europe, so we can compare the different type of installations, and we can choose the best for each situation. Maybe 1 or 2 points that I wanted to highlight for this typical installation in condominiums is that first, we think that it is necessary to have a dedicated power meter. So it's a bit technical, but we observe that with this dedicated power meter, we have no problem with power. We have no problem with reimburse the electricity to the whole building. So for the property manager is the key, I think, to unlock the development of chargers into condominium. The second point maybe that I wanted to highlight is that with a charge point operator, you're able to get the best electricity price, because usually the CPO will buy we have a global electricity contract for all the condominiums, and he will be able to propose good prices, because he will have, for example, peak hours, or more powerful electricity prices. So, for example, in Spain, you can have prices near to €0 by kilowatt hour during 2 hours in the day, during midday, for example. In France, it will be in the middle of the night. But to do that, you need to be a company to have access to these special electricity prices. And of course, I can answer to all of the questions. You have, for example, elements about maintenance, about administrative burden. So thanks to the CPO, I think that EV charging in residential buildings will be unlocked.
Thank you, Adouin. One question. I mean, when you talked about a dedicated power meter, do you mean for let's say the whole of the parking area? So so your contract is with the building broadly, and you serve all the parking spaces there, or do you mean with, say, each one per parking space or per apartment, so that the power you're able to invoice an individual resident?
Yes, thanks for this question. No, it's one power meter for all the chargers. Because one power meter by charger, it's a lot, and it's quite difficult to deploy. So of course it's one for all the chargers. So the CPO will have the responsibility for load balancing, for example, to avoid the breaker to trip. And so this dedicated power meter is of course opened by the CPO, and is not connected to the it's connected to the grid, but it's not behind existing meters. So it's completely independent, of course.
And do you end up, as the CPO, doing the permitting for this dedicated line, or is it done by the building itself, the building association?
No, it's done by the CPO. Yeah, done by the CPO. Maybe one last point is that this offer is at zero cost for the building. only the corners, the users, drivers will pay something. And so when you have a general assembly of the building, of course, it's easier to vote a zero-cost solution.
Okay, sounds very, very compelling. Super, thanks, Antoine. Let's move over to Petar from AMPECO, please.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Petar Georgiev. I'm the head of strategic alliances, regulatory affairs, and sustainability at AMPECO, and we're a global provider of charging management solutions with over 170,000 connected charge points using our CPMS in 67 countries. So not only in Europe, but also globally. And I'm really excited to be part of the discussion today because there's a lot of insights. And for those of you who haven't seen the report, I'll use the opportunity to say it again. Please have a look at it. You find, I believe, more than 20 different case studies by members and all those diversity of charging use cases that the report covers in the business models behind them. So today, really, in my remarks to start off, I'd like to share a bit more about the business rationale behind private charging, particularly in the multi-unit dwelling space, and why it's really essential to solve that if we're talking about mass EV adoption. Because there are different private charging use cases to be considered. It's important to consider the location partners, as Antoine mentioned already, as well for residential, for fleets, for workspaces, but also for destination charging. We'll probably hear about that also in today's discussion. But let me start by highlighting what's really the one most important thing for the multi-unit dwelling use case. And for us, at least from our software perspective, and we see it working with different CPOs around Europe, is about automation and billing, which in our view are very much interlinked. And housing associations or property managers, they would oversee shared infrastructure. They're not energy companies, so they have to rely on someone else to track the usage, split the invoices, manage the user access. And that's where automation becomes essential if we really want to scale that type of business. So automated metering and billing, without them, charging just becomes a manual burden. And think of the number of chargers that we're going to deploy in the multi-unit dwelling setup. So that makes it really, really a big challenge. And this use case, I personally find it to be a structural and social economic with social economic importance. It has a very high impact, and it will be probably the most widely used because we're talking about higher volumes, lower investment, and very low margins. So it's important, of course, compared to public charging. So it's very important to get this right. But I'll leave some of my other remarks for later.
Well, I was going to ask how are you getting it right so far? How are you? What products have you deployed to the market to start?
Yeah. So one of the things that we see really working well is a more flexible EV driver onboarding, but also at the same time a more streamlined installer workflow so that the installers can really be faster on that, so less manual work. A service model that we've been deploying quite successfully, especially in the Nordics. We've seen their large deployments is the so-called post-paid subscription billing, just like utility. So you don't pay as you go, but you have, at the end of the month. It's important. We find it as an important shift from a transactional model to a model similar to what utilities are billing customers. It's easier for the housing associations. And also you can bring in aspects like home reimbursement in play and bring additional value. Another one has to do with issue management and monitoring. So really less on-site visits, more successful remote diagnostics, early detection. This is all things that we're working towards. And last but not least, I would highlight energy services. This is the next step that companies take. And I know Odwan Ziplik has been doing some great work saving customers money and at the same time offering really the best prices. That just explains, it gives a very good example of how multi-unit dwellings are great for behind-the-meter optimizations and making sure that the driver gets the best and the fair price, and at the same time, the CPO is making a profit, all this using real-time electricity pricing. So, yeah, and this has to work in a multi-country setup. ultimately, because you have local specificities in different markets. In some markets, actually, what I'm talking about is not possible. So that's where we have to step in and make sure that there's the right regulatory reality in all EU countries. It's a single market in the end of the day.
Okay, super. Thank you. A lot there. Obviously, we could talk about a lot for hours, and maybe our next webinar we'll dive deeper on that. Amandine, there are many people who live in buildings that simply do not have access to on-site parking, but they might want to go electric. Do you have what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So hi everyone, and thank you Aaron for this question. So firstly, my name is Amandine de Oliveira. I'm head of the consulting department at Gireve. You may know Gireve for its roaming platform, I hope so, in the charging ecosystem, maybe also for plug and charge or clearing services or even our datasets. But we also have a consulting team that offers a full range of services like training courses, market studies in Europe around electromobility, charging pricing, EVSE deployment strategy, network quality, or partner research, all based on our data, of course. So to answer your question, yeah, it's a great one. And in fact, we increasingly see public charging being also used as a form of home charging by those who don't have access to a private parking space, for instance. So in dense urban areas, many EV drivers rely on nearby on-street chargers, also public charging points in residential neighborhoods. And these drivers typically plug in overnight, as we know, or during also extended stays at home, mimicking the use patterns of private home charging that we can see. It is especially the case in the Netherlands, for instance, with short distance to cover, but also very little private charging possibilities. So at Gireve, we see this clearly in our data. It's also a real use case. The usage patterns on certain public chargers show consistent overnight charging sessions, indicating residential use. And this reinforces the need to treat public infrastructures as a critical extension of home charging to ensure that it remains reliable and accessible for all.
And I mean, you talked about this in sort of dense urban areas where I would imagine that the land use of the public space is also greatly constrained. So how should, let's say, a public authority or others think about this on kind of nearby public charging to support residents who don't necessarily have access to their own dedicated parking?
Yeah, okay. Of course, for every need, we have to specifically focus on what the people may need in specific areas. I don't think there is a potential to deploy residential public charging everywhere, of course, because in some areas people won't need it for at-home charging at least. But in some urban areas, as I said, and as you said also, it's still a need. We have seen at the very beginning from the presentation that 90% of the charging sessions occur in private spaces, and it's huge and it's essential. What is also essential, because it's a real fear for people to go electric, is to cover the 10% left. And this requires help for public actors, governments, of course, to push it a little bit more, to help with incentive, for instance. And I would say even to at least provide a stabilized view in the long term, which is something that is quite, the CPOs are quite dependent to have a clear view of the next years regarding both economical incentive and laws also.
Is there data or digital infrastructure, Amandine, that can help support this rollout, or even also in private spaces?
Yeah, well, I would say that data is really the backbone of smart infrastructures. I know this because at Gireve we work with real-time data on millions of charging sessions that occur in the public space, right? Over 700,000 EVs in Europe. And doing so, we can in the end share also access to these crucial insights to help operators to manage availability, to monitor usage patterns, to forecast demand, decide the pricing, of course, also to monitor their own market share and the evolution of the competition. But for the residential charging, it is critical too, because the usage is often more predictable than the mobility or opportunity public charging that we often see and monitor, and that allows for smarter load management, I would say. We often hear that the smart charging may start in the private area, and I think it's also true. It's true that maybe we'll start in private charging infrastructures, but also in the public later on. And to do so, the data is really viable to have a better management and also a better return on investment for the operators.
Thank you. Petar, you talked about behind the meter optimization and many other things that could be done with the, let's say, residential user and their habits. Do you have the access to the data that you need, or are there additional areas where it needs to be improved, needs to grow, so that you can offer better services or tailor what you offer?
That's a good question, Aaron. I think a lot can be achieved already with what exists in some markets in terms of data that can be used. And here I'm referring, for example, to getting prices from places like Nord Pool, where you can get that real-time pricing and then you can implement that into your tariff. At the same time, we see more and more, and it comes with volume, right? When you have more AC chargers, you can group them together, and we call that essentially a flexibility asset. So you can do a lot with that. You can enter different flexibility markets, and at the same time, you have the individual chargers that can do smart charging, grouped EVCs, or full DLM circuits that cover the whole of the multi-unit dwelling unit. So there's a lot that can be done also on forecasting, and we see more and more value in extracting the right signals from the grid. I personally see it as the next frontier, really, as we accumulate the volume of chargers to move to that space.
Okay, super. Thank you. And then Adouin, in your case study, you talked about how you were able to offer services where drivers, owners of EVs could even profit from installing charging points at their premises. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, indeed. So there are several ways to profit of these chargers. So first one, I didn't mention it before, but that answers partially to your question. But when you choose to install a collective infrastructure for chargers in a residential building, you will improve the value of your apartment or your parking spot, because of course, even if a charger is not specifically deployed on your parking spot, there is the capacity to. And so we observe that there is an increase by 8%, between 8 and 12% of the value of a parking spot if you choose to deploy a collective infrastructure. This is the first point. The second point I wanted to mention is that as I began to explain it before, with a CPO, a CPO will be able to manage the charger, so that the charger will charge during the low electricity prices, a bit like Peter mentioned it from North Pool. But so, for example, in Europe, in France, it's AMPECO spot, but we will know the driver habits. We will analyze the driver habits, or the driver can, in certain cases, tell us, I want to leave in the morning at 7 a.m., for example, and we will be able to manage the charger so that the driver will charge only during very low prices hours. And so thanks to that, we will, of course, optimize the benefit for the driver. And the little point to highlight maybe is that, of course, in a multi-dwelling houses, you will have a lot of chargers, and there is a limited power. So we will manage that, of course, so that everybody don't charge at the same time.
Okay, clear. Final word from each of you, since this is a ChargeUp Europe webinar, and ChargeUp Europe is a policy association, and in fact, the State of Industry report includes a number of policy asks. You've talked about the opportunities and, let's say, the next frontiers you see for data usage and energy optimization. Are there any roadblocks or hurdles that, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive has been passed, the Renewable Energy Directive exists, the energy market, electricity market design is there and needs to be transposed. But are you seeing, let's say, policy obstacles or roadblocks, or what would be the one thing from a policy perspective you would like to see in order to facilitate the more rapid uptake and widespread uptake of residential charging, or in the case, Amandine, of you, of, let's say, nearby public charging? So, Adouin, please.
Yeah, one blocker maybe, or would be to open the new parameters. So we are dependent on the DSO, the distribution system operator. So there is one DSO or several, for example, 800, I think, in Germany. And it's quite complicated because, of course, the DSO has a lot of work to connect, for example, solar panels and so on. So we observe that, for example, in France, we have to wait for around 6 months to have this new parameter. It's roughly the same in Germany. So yeah, this is the main blocker for us. It's the opening of the new meter with the DSO.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope it gets better soon. Petar, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that everywhere, really, and that's why also at ChargeUp Europe, we have those conversations with the DSOs as much as possible. Obviously, some of them are represented in Brussels as well, so we can really influence the conversation at EU level. But what I've seen, and I'll start with, of course, the energy aspect, that's the next frontier, but we really need to get things done before that. And as Audouin mentioned, the meters are and the connection agreements, those are areas where we're working a lot. I just wanted to give an example from the UK, where actually recently, as of last month, at the end of the month, they pushed a law that abolishes the requirement to get a permit to install a residential private charger. And they did that because they also have a regulation that mandates smart charging. And essentially, the uncontrollable installation of chargers is not that much of a problem. In the UK, they've implemented a requirement which is called randomized delay. It's a function that essentially ensures that no sudden peaks appear. And this has given, at least for now, that's how I see it, it has given a clear path to installing chargers at the right pace, even if the DSO connection might have some limitations. Now, of course, in some cases, there's clearly need to reinforce the grid or whatnot, but I think really in Europe, we need, in the EU, we need some of that as well in different countries to implement that. It will be a member state affair. It's not something at the EU level. At the EU level, we see the EBBD, and we'll get more chargers. It's a clear compliance frontier. We see it in parking lots as well. So I would really also focus in that direction.
Super, thank you. Great examples. Amandine, a final word from you.
Yes. So I will say that one major challenge for the private is the fragmentation of stakeholders like building managers, energy providers, mobility operators, CPOs, of course, and the complexity of aligning technical, legal, and economic interests. But I would say it is mainly the same challenge in the public areas. And as I said earlier, the legislation and financial aid must be incentive-based and above all stable over time with a long-term vision, because the hardest thing for players is viability, which creates planning difficulties.
Understand that for sure. It's something that we live as Greenway as well. So good. Well, thank you very, very much to our residential charging panelists. All of you, please feel free to reach out to them directly if you want to learn more about the solutions they offer or maybe the techniques behind it. I imagine they'd be open to speaking with you. And now we want to move on to our corporate fleets part two, corporate fleets panel for today's discussion. And so with that, by the way, I want to remind audience, if you'd like to, please feel free to submit questions to the audience, to the panelists, and so that we can incorporate them into our discussion as well if we have time. And so now I want to invite over Yasmin Asef from the consultancy AFRI, who did an entire research report on corporate fleets for ChargeUp Europe to present the findings from their research and use that to kick off our discussion.
Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Asef, and I'm part of AFRI Management Consulting. I'm in charge of the e-mobility practice. I'm based in France, based in Paris. So last year, we have been mandated by ChargeUp Europe to make a study on the impact of fleet electrification on the global stock of EV in the market. And I'm going to present some of the results here. But before that, let me just remind all of us quickly about the current situation. Just to remind that the decarbonization of transport is essential for the global decarbonization in Europe, because they account for 50% of the transport sector greenhouse gas emission. And when it comes to corporates make almost 60% of the new car registrations. So the total European, I would say, car stock will depend largely on the choice made by corporates today. Just if we, one word about thank you for changing the slide, but if we can, thank you so much. Remain on that one. So when we've done this study, that was again, we finished in September last year, and I assume that things might not have that much change. Slightly in the right direction, I hope, and I'm sure in some countries. But anyway, the corporate fleet manager were still reluctant on switching to BEV and buying battery electric cars. There are many reasons for that. We're not going to talk about this here. The main objective of our study was really to quantify and give numbers and quantify this impact that we all have in mind, but we wanted to have, and ChargeUp Europe wanted to have some numbers here. So if we go to the next slide. The situation today is that 3 countries count for 50% of total EV. And apologies here, we are talking about the whole Europe, large Europe, not EU 27. But again, a reminder of the situation today that countries are getting electrified in different rhythm. And if we go again to the next one, our study was focused on 9 European countries, where we have selected those 9 countries because they represent approximately 80% of the total EU passenger car fleet. So that is approximately 195 million vehicles. We didn't we didn't go to the analysis of smaller countries, because we think that, and we have seen also that the country like Germany with a big I would say fleet, if the rhythm of electrification of Germany is really driving the rhythm of electrification of Europe as a whole. And we have seen this last year in 2024, where the electrification had a slowdown in Germany, a strong slowdown, that had a great impact in Europe in general. And we can see it now that this is the country. So we have selected those countries with the highest fleet: Germany, Italy, France, Spain, Poland, and the rest you can see here. And we did two scenarios. So if we switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. What was our methodology? One word about the methodology before going to the results. We observed that in some countries, the share of battery electric vehicle purchased by companies is lower, not to say much lower, than the share of purchase of other engines, other ICE or hybrid or what. So our first scenario, that we call the status quo scenario, assumes that this hesitation towards going to BEV continue. The same, this hesitation will continue until 2035, the year where all new electric vehicle sales must be electric anyhow by regulation. This is the status quo scenario. And then we did, to assess this, the impact of accelerated BEV adoption by companies, we introduced an alternative scenario, here called accelerated scenario, that is starting from 2025. Company will be closing their, let's say, BEV adoption gap. That is the accelerated scenario. For example, if a company today has 50% of ICE vehicle, or a country 50% of ICE vehicle, but only 40% of BEV, we assume that the BEV share will rise to match the 50% share. And this scenario eliminates the so-called BEV deficit caused by corporate reluctance. So that is very high level, the methodology, and of course offline we can take questions on the methodology. Then if we go now to the results, we can see that we have estimated for those 9 countries that we mentioned in the beginning, if the fleet electrify at the optimal rate, there will be an additional 9 million BEV on the road by 2035. So that is quite significant between what we call the accelerated scenario, where the share of BEV fleet will be 30%, and the status quo where the share is 25%. And even with this so-called accelerated scenarios, if again, this study was done September last year, we may want to update numbers, but that's not the point. The point is that having and reaching the objective in 2035 requires really that the corporate play the game, I would say, and start to buy pure battery electric vehicle from now and electrify their fleet. So that is the main result of our study. And if we go to the next one, just to say that the fact that the corporate cars are getting more electrified, that will also lead to a bigger secondary market that we have estimated for those countries to reach 4 million BEV by 2035. And this expansion of the secondary market it's really important for the democratization of BEV, as the prices will go down, and this is a factor of making the EV more affordable. That is the summary of our study in a few minutes. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all.
Super. Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you to Afri for conducting that research. That research is available, parts of it in the State of Industry report, which you can find at the link that Lucy has shared. And as Yasmin said, I guess if there's questions in the audience as well for Yasmin, that we can take them during the discussion. So we have now, so I guess the question would become, why are corporates scared of fleet electrifying? Or is it some other, let's say, what is the reasons why it's not happening, in the accelerated scenarios not taking place? Why that is not the status quo scenario? And since we are a charging association, we would like to say that there are many companies that are charging side companies offering solutions and can be the partners with corporates as they want to electrify their fleets. And so we are very, very fortunate to have speakers on this panel representing companies that are deploying solutions for corporate fleets. And so I would like to welcome Mathieu Caudron from Edenred, Tiziana Marchisio from Fleet 220, and Christian Gehring from DKV Mobility. And since each of you and your companies are in fact offering free solutions to fleets, I would love if you could introduce yourselves, your company, and explain briefly the solution that you are providing. So let's start with Mathieu.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. So I'm Mathieu Caudron, head of e-mobility at Edenred. So a short introduction about Edenred. We are a French company with 12,000 employees present in 45 countries, and we do offer specific purpose solutions for food, employee engagement, and mobility. So we are actually a large player in the B2B mobility space, both in Europe and Latin America. And of course, we are very concerned with the transition to EV charging. So it's for us a strategic development, and that's why now we are proposing in our core markets offers where we cover workplace solutions, home charging for corporates, so meaning being reimbursed for your electricity costs when you charge at home, and of course on-the-road solution using public charging fleet cards. We've acquired in 2024 the Danish company Spirit, which provides a global e-mobility platform that is now active in 20 markets. Which shows also our commitment to be present in and developing this ecosystem. I think when we look at the context, we do feel there is something moving in the corporate fleet segments. And actually, in the report, we have a nice story and use case about a Danish healthcare and emergency service company that we equipped fully with an electric solution, EV charging solution. So covering a mix of workplace charging, home charging. And why this is relevant is because to show all the customers that are still reluctant to go on EV, that you can have a business where your operational continuity is absolutely critical. And you can be a very large company and you can have a mix of different use cases and still go for a very successful electric transition using this type of solutions. So we feel that there is this strong appetite from the fleets, but also a big deal of difficulties that our fleet managers are encountering when going for this. I would say, first of all, it's not easy for most of them that have been doing this for a long time, managing their fleets, etc., to embrace what it really means to transition to electric and the complexity that is associated for going to electric. That's why what we do, we are really here to help them transition. Right? So it's a very key word for us, to transition to electric vehicles, finding the right solution, finding the adapted solutions for their needs, and making sure they can find also as well an installation and I'd say equipments that are future-proof. Right? It's very important. When the transition means that you start small today, maybe you have a couple of chargers here and there, but in the future you will add more. You will add more use cases perhaps, and you will need to think about in the future how to expand your installation. And of course, when you start this transition, you want to have a quick solution very fast and maybe very cheap because you're forced to do it right now. And that's where also our advisory is very important to make sure that we can also say, okay, we can provide you with something now, but also that will be good for the future. In general, what we see that it's also very important to work on the change management within corporates internally. So some companies are actually considering the change for a long time, but they feel also internal resistance. First resistance being what I talked about earlier, the fleet manager, which suddenly has a big workload of deploying a rolling out infrastructure. and even managing the project of rolling out chargers at the home of their employees, which might not have any chargers at all. So it crosses a bit the previous segments on actually residential charging. This is where it's super important to have at least guidance tools to offload that work from the fleet manager and to give that to a trusted partner that can roll this type of projects.
Super, Mathieu. Thank you. I will follow up with some other questions, okay? But I'd love to hear from the other people as well. So Titiana, Fleet 220 also has experience doing this, especially in the Italian context. So could you please share a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for the introduction, and hello, everyone, even from my side. My name is Tiziana Marchisio, and I am the sales team lead at Fleet 220. Yes, I just say a few words about the company, our company, and the activities we do to support the electrification for fleet. At Fleet, we are deeply committed to supporting companies as they embark on their electrification journey. We understand that the transitioning to an electric fleet can seem complex, but we try to help them to simplify it every step of the way. So our mission is to provide comprehensive turnkey and tailor-made support. Every situation, every customer is different from each other, so you need to identify the singularity of the landscape and understand which could be the best solution for them, providing consultancy, implementing smart charging solution, and providing backend platform for cost control and monitoring. We don't just sell products, we try to offer them a full ecosystem designed to make fleet electrification seamless and efficient. And one of our key offerings includes, as I said before, smart charging solutions at workplace, ensuring that the fleet vehicles are always ready for operation. We also specialize in the installation at home, so wall boxes, employees at home, providing convenience for the drivers. And this dual approach, we think that can cover the most critical charging location, ensuring their maximum uptime and flexibility for the fleet. Beyond this operational benefit and time efficiency, there's also to consider the significant economic advantages because cost of private charging is considerably lower than public charging. So therefore, companies looking to electrify must consider installations both at office and employees' homes for optimized charging costs. What we offer is even the advanced backend platform that empower fleet managers. We know that fleet managers are resistant to change, and they are, as said before, for a lot of work to do for electrifying fleet. But with our support for the installation and backend platform, they can monitor, they can manage all charging costs, they can have every step of the way they are completely view on the charging cost at workplace, in public, at homes. And so this simplified a lot their job and their monitoring and costs for the electric vehicles. So for drivers, instead, there are significant advantages. They benefit for easier charging at home, workplace, public, reducing the range anxiety that we know is maybe the first roadblock for the drivers. And they can count on reliable charging options on the go, at home, at work. And they can have the hub, an intuitive charging hub, and with this app they can charge anywhere, anytime, without limitations for network compatibility, and making the experience incredible user friendly. So we think that this can help the corporate for stepping up in the electrification.
Clear. Okay, thank you. That's a lot. Do you only work in Italy, or do you serve clients outside of Italy as well?
We are mainly focused in Italy, but of course we have multinational customers, so we can operate even in the other European countries, in France, in Germany, in Spain, and in Switzerland, Belgium.
Do you see any unique characteristics or market conditions in Italy versus other places?
In Italy, there's a kind of lack about the electric vehicles due to some kind of political reasons and the higher costs that even how the electric vehicles still have compared to the internal combustion engine. So maybe in Italy there's still more gap to cover to reach what Yasmin said before, the best pace for the electrification that can lead us to the goals of the target for 2035.
Okay, thank you. Christian, now your turn. I'd love to hear about the solutions that DKV offers, and also ask, how does a relationship with a corporate that's looking to electrify its fleet or begin that transition, how does that relationship begin? How do they find a charging partner, and how do they choose between multiple charging partner options available to them?
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. So I'm Christian, responsible within DKV Mobility for the product management, e-mobility services, everything around at home and at work charging, and shortly around DKV. So we are mobility service provider companies, so serving all our customers with mobility services from tolling, fueling, up to charging, and especially more and more charging in the last recent years. And what we are offering our customers as a kind of solution is wallbox solutions at home, of course, at work chargers, depot chargers. There's a little bit background also.
Sorry, yeah, someone has their mic open. And whoever you are, if you could please. Hold on. Christian,
just wait for a second. Perfect. So now I'm back. And so DKV Mobility, we same story as Ingrid, for example. We acquired Greenflux as a backend several years ago, serving 100,000 and more charge points throughout Europe. Also as a platform-based business, of course. And shortly or end of last year, we acquired eClearing, kind of competitor of Gireve. So also in platform, aggregator platform, allowing us to serve more and more customers and their needs. And the question you raised at the beginning is like, how do I interact, or we interact at first with customers? And typically the customers, the first time reaching out to mobility services or us, they are a kind of uncertain situation. So I will give you shortly 3 examples. The first customer, big logistic company in Germany, they started with employee charging by a decentralized procurement approach, meaning they gave just every employee a kind of guidance. You buy a wallbox, maximum 900 euros, and we do the manual reimbursement via traveling costs. The worst idea they ever could have, because in the end, they ended up in incompatible hardware, so not OCPP certified or ready at all. So you, as a backend provider, cannot integrate, you cannot manage. And they faced scalability issues since they had different hardware solutions, sometimes with the manual reimbursement still, and then they changed to OCPP protocols. So that's one customer we had. So defining standards, central procurement, that was the first step we did with them. Second customer, also big logistic company, but not in the at-home area. They were focused on at work, but they had a kind of similar approach at the beginning. Every location, every subsidy, they have chosen their own low-cost charging solution, which ended up in a kind of mess as well, because every location had chosen another hardware solution, another provider. Same story there. The first thing we did, we tried to manage him or tried to guide him into a direction that everything is managed by the headquarter. Also strict guidance. But there are also other customers. They are just starting using their charging cards on the road, because it's the easiest and cheapest way you can start with. So avoiding capital infrastructure projects, and especially invest. And the third one, it's a partner of us called Koopman in Germany. They were pretty clever at the beginning, because they have chosen a hardware solution, a standardized hardware solution for at home. So it was really easy for us to integrate all the hardware and manage then the reimbursement with them. But they slightly faced another issue at work since they provided a DC charger on their premise, and they wanted to have a billing solution on that charger. And in Germany, so we are a German-based company serving all the European markets, but in Germany and, for example, Austria, you have that measurement and calibration law. And that charger wasn't ready for measurement and calibration, so they needed to retrofit the charger, and then we were able, together with them, to put different tariffs on them because they are having an industrial environment. A lot of trucks already charging there, but of course the truck doesn't want to pay, based on the TCO perspective, the roaming prices. So they offered their neighbors more or less their charging station, and through the platform approach, we can easily put different tariffs per customer on that charger. So getting rid of the invoice for different chargers in that environment, and just enabling easy charging and cheap charging through a tariff management. And that are 3 customer journeys, and everything starts with a kind of uncertainty level and decentralized approach, which typically ends up in a kind of mess and different hardware solutions. You first of all need to understand, and then you need to find a scalable solution. Anything else, it's just expensive, and especially for corporate fleets, not possible, even if you go in the truck segment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very interesting to sort of hear that journey. I mean, I wonder if it's a sign of maturation, of the industry, that you've now come to a point where there are more scalable solutions, more centralized procurement, and more centralized solutions being disseminated to the employees. Like, let's say the back office, the head office has more knowledge and more experience in this point. But yeah, Mathieu, over to you. I mean, I actually thought this was a really interesting journey that Christian shared of some of their clients. How do you see it in terms of how do clients or potential partners find you, and how can they determine which type of a company to go with for their charging solutions?
Yeah, so first of all, we are of course looking in our existing customer portfolio. Basically, we know that all of our customers are going to go electric at some point. So it's a matter of getting out there and making sure they are aware that there are some partners that can go with them. And we are, of course, obviously, for most of our existing customers, a trusted partner. They have us on fuel. They know us with our other solutions. So we are very well placed to handle that transition. So that's how they come to us. And then when they come to us, when we have this approach where basically we are agnostic relative to the hardware, we're also agnostic towards the installation services. So we're really in a position where we can advise them to go for the setup or the best setup according to their needs, right? So, I mean, this is super interesting for players like our colleagues here, which are really in a good position to advise and help the customers navigate across all the different solutions that are there in the market, caring for the short term as well as the long term. And I completely second what Christian said and Tiziana as well. Is like the standardization, the looking at the stability, making some future-proof choices is super important. And this is what you get from trusted partners. They help you not only to serve this one-time thing, which is putting some chargers in the ground and off you go, but saying, okay, if you make those choices, if you go for that strategy, then your transition will succeed, because over time you will reap the benefits of your initial investment instead of maybe doing it all over in 5 years' time, basically. So that's for me one of the key points, is like being able to have this advisory approach, neutral positioning, and being able to aim for the future as well as serving the short-term needs.
Great, thank you. Yasmin, there is a question from the crowd for you, and it is: what is the main limiting factor of EV adoption in the corporate fleet segment?
Actually, I think that some of the points have been addressed by the panelists. Change management might be one. I don't think that any technical point is I would say, is limiting the adoption of EV in corporate fleet. And what we have seen in we've done some interviews here with actors, and we have seen that the lack of knowledge is probably the most important one. And so change management, explanation to your operators or to the corporate users of the fact that the EV is well enough. That are the most critical points here that we have also seen. And we have seen also that major companies that are getting electrified, they do the electrification journey, first of all, because it is a strategic decision of the company. And so it is driven, I would say, top down mostly, because they have some decarbonization targets, and they have to electrify. So they go with electrification. But today there are also some other topics, which is is the parity of costs here? Yes, no. Previous years we had also some topics around the availability of cars, but that one is getting much better. Now you have different segments of cars that are available pure electric, so this is less a reason of not electrifying. So yeah, change management probably is the topic. And the initial cost, so the capex. But we can see already in the market new cars with that are much cheaper, but they are smaller as well.
Do any of the panelists have anything to add to that question?
No. Haron, if I can say something.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I completely agree with Yasmin. I think that it's a matter of change management and capex, the cost of the cars, the cost of the charging infrastructure, the premises at home, for sure is an important investment for companies. And this is why is even important that not all the burden is in charge of the companies, but we need supportive economic incentive policies vital for companies, such as advantageous fringe benefits for electric vehicles, or ensuring that domestic installation are not considered taxable company benefits. I think that measures in this direction could provide significant support for companies, helping them in support of the costs. Even the development of geographical public charging networks would address charging needs outside the private context, but the incentive policies for installation or targeted tax relief to sustain the costs, and even incentives extended to the energy costs associated with the vehicle charging. I think that this stuff can help a lot the companies, and of course, as Amandine said before, all these support policies needs to be stable in the years, otherwise to avoid uncertainty that often leads company to an approach wait and see what will happen, waiting that the situation becomes clearer. Instead, we need a stability for making investment and for going forward with the electrification process.
Yeah, super. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Christian, working across so many different markets, do you see examples where, sort of as Tiziana was saying, there are some more policies that are more supportive, or policy regimes or tax structures that are more supportive of fleet electrification, or examples where they are less so and need to be addressed?
Yeah, definitely. So since we are based more or less in Germany, and Germany has sometimes the highest or most complex regulations,
and yet the biggest market.
Fortunately. Yeah, that's as well. But there are some regulations in place, and some are also missing, which is causing some problems. One example is tax regulation for employee reimbursement. So typically, you have a household, you want to electrify everything. You have your heat pump, you have your electric car, you have your PV, so solar system, battery storage, etc. And the taxation part in Germany is designed in that way that you need to have a one-to-one reimbursement. So you need to be very accurate and sure about the electricity price of every kilowatt hour, which is technically impossible if you have a solar system, battery storage, dynamics, so smart metering and dynamic tariff in behind. That's nearly impossible. So technically, from an electrical perspective, it's impossible, except like Odon, you mentioned, you build in several meters at every certain point, then you technically can manage that. And there we need an easy solution for taxation of such setups, because we all want to have renewables in the system. But if taxation is binding us or blocking us with that, that's not what we want to have. So that's one example.
Right. Mathieu, any others that you see?
Yeah, I first of all, I completely second this one, definitely. And I would add to this as well that when it comes to home charging reimbursement, we're actually crossing several regulations that will kind of obstruct the path for doing this service at scale in many markets. So there is the fiscal one that Christian just mentioned, especially for Germany, which, by the way, in France, we have the exact opposite. Like, it's recommended to have like a fixed price instead of doing the exact thing. So again, a topic where it could be good to have the same setup all across our markets, definitely. And also there is also the payment regulation, because, you know, you reimbursing the electricity at home, the regime of that, does it fall under payment regulation? Is it like an invoicing? Probably not. You cannot buy electricity from an individual. So this is technically a very important problem to solve for companies, because it's the cheapest way to charge, actually. Allowing to an employee to charge at home and reimburse him. It's the cheapest way for a company to get the vehicle charged. But on the other hand, you start entering a territory where you have many moving parts, unclear regulations, benefits in kind topics. And this is where I would really love to see more simplification, because this is definitely a use case that is, to some extent, quite easy to roll out, but with a framework that is totally unclear and a very fragmented across Europe situation.
That is really, really, really interesting, and especially you're mentioning two of the largest markets have completely opposing structures, and it's like the opposite of harmonization. What about on the, let's say, on the facility side, you know, where there are buildings with depots? You talked about change management, let's say, in the culture of the fleet operators and the vehicles and the habits there. But what about also of the depots and the logistics centers themselves? Is there some sort of change management need to be done about the role that those buildings play if suddenly they're hosting all of this new infrastructure, this new charging infrastructure?
Yeah, I would, if I may start, I would say that it's perhaps more obvious, in my view, that we need to equip those buildings. It's just that there again, we fall in other types of complexity. We do work with a lot of companies which are not owner of their building, for example. So it means that you can easily procure a fleet card, no problem. But then you need to have a charger installed in your parking lot, and suddenly, because you're not owner of your building, then you need to go to your landlord, and there's all types of complexity. I think here we have in the panel here several platforms, and the platform approach solves to some extent those use cases, right? Because then you can say, okay, your landlord can actually invest in the chargers. Actually, by law in many countries, in Germany, in France, for example, they have to actually install chargers on their parking lots, and we provide them for easy solutions so they can split the billing across their different multiple tenants, or even for single tenants if they need to do that. That is super important, and that is key to unlock also this use case at scale. We do think that workplace charging is a key component as well, is not to be overlooked. But that creates also other types of complexity, other type of dialogue. We have solutions to solve that. But here again, it's a whole new ecosystem also to discover and entangle, so to speak.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And maybe
Chiara?
adding,
Yes.
adding shortly on that much here. So in the end, it's the conflict between the investment you make, so the return on an investment, more or less, because you need to build the energy somehow to someone else. Typically, that's the truck customer, and the truck customer is facing the TCO problem. So return of invest versus TCO, and that's the biggest problem within the depots: high investments and low margins.
Yeah. Understood. Tatiana, you're nodding your head. Would you like to give us the final word from the panel? And maybe, but
Yeah.
please end solutions oriented. You know, what do we do to address this?
But about the depots, I completely agree with Mathieu Christian. So there's every project, every depots are different from the other one, and so you need to find the best solution for everything. And yes, the problem of the investment and the profit is not so easy to solve, but the company is trying to understand which could be the best way for the infrastructure. For sure, is important for a company that has fleet electric vehicles to have a charging infrastructure in their premises. So even if the property is not in the companies, what we have seen is that it takes a lot of time, but usually then landlords give their approval to the project for the charging infrastructure. It's sometimes a matter of cost, because sometimes landlords would like to do the investment and then rent the infrastructure to the company, or sometimes instead allow them to install their chargers and just give them the approval for the project. So it's different scenarios that we have dealt during this year.
No, indeed. Okay, well, that was time. And so I want to thank all of our panelists on both panels for really their excellent contributions. And you know, one takeaway I hear is that there are charging partners on both the residential side as well as on the fleet and corporate side and the public side who deeply understand the needs and the use cases of the fleet operators, whether it's logistics, parcel, or you know, like regional passenger vehicles, service vehicles, whatnot, or whether it's people living in residences, whether they have their own home dedicated parking space or not. That we really understand what our partners are going through. So maybe that shouldn't be a pain point anymore for anyone who's looking to electrify their building or their fleet. That there's really reliable, solid, experienced, and well qualified charging partners out there for them to work with all across Europe. So thank you to all of our attendees for joining today's panel. Please find the State of Industry report at the ChargeUp website and reach out to the Secretariat of ChargeUp Europe if you have any further questions or anything like that. Is there any final words from Kira, Chiara, or Lucy?
I will say thank you to you, Aaron, for having shared this webinar, and to all our speakers, and for all that took part today, and of course to all the helped to make and deliver this State of the Industry report. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and don't hesitate to download it. The link is in the chat. So thank you very much.